Hello again, everybody. This is Andy with another sports card video. I know it's been a while, but here I am back again. In this particular episode, I'd like to talk about Ed Kranepool, show some baseball cards, and kind of talk about his history as it relates to the Mets. Ed Kranepool is one of those players that I was first introduced when I started opening packs of cards in the mid-'70s, and at that point he was sort of a tie back to the old team, the old legacy, especially the '69 Mets in their miracle year winning the World Series. Anyway, in this video, I want to go through and, like I said, show a bunch of his cards from when he first started as a 17-year-old rookie in 1962 up through pretty much the rest of his life, but mostly through his baseball career with the Mets. So most of what I talk about in this video comes from this book. It's called The Last Miracle. It was published, written by Ed Kranepool and published in 2023. This, along with a few other sources, is where most of my information comes from. I recommend, if you're a Mets fan, it's got a lot of interesting history and his perspective on what it was like to be one of the first Mets and then his career and his life. So I want to start this story in 1944 in Normandy, France, during World War II. Edward Emile Kranepool II was killed in France while fighting against the Germans. A few months later, in November, his son, Edward III, was born in a place called the Castle Hill, which is in the Bronx, New York City. Now, Edward was raised by a single parent. His mother took care of him and his siblings, and he attended James Monroe High School when he started to play baseball and actually did quite well. His senior year, in 1962, at the age of 17, he was chasing down and eventually beat the Hank Greenberg record for most home runs in a single season in the high school. With all this notoriety around it and Ed starting to show great promise, he started to get recruited by major league teams. The Chicago White Sox were interested in him, as well as the New York Mets and a few other teams. Now, Ed looked at his opportunities to play. He saw a better opportunity with the Mets by that point. They had been mostly rostered with seasoned players, much older than Ed, and so on the 27th of June in 1962, on his graduation day from high school, Ed Kranepool signed a $80,000 contract with the New York Mets. Within 48 hours, he was on a plane joining the team out in California watching the Los Angeles Dodgers play. So I flipped the camera around. I'm going to show off some cards. So there is no 1962 card of Ed Kranepool from Topps or from anybody that I could find, so I'll substitute this 2011 Topps Heritage card, which they commemorate his rookie season by sticking an official 1962 nickel in the cardboard itself. So the card's worth at least 5 cents, which is nice. So he flies out to California. Casey Stengel, New York Mets manager at the time, and if you're not familiar with his influence on the early Mets teams, really recommend you watch Mookie Chilson's video talking about it. I'll have a link in the description below. He really kind of summarizes the impact that Casey had on the early team and his goals and how he sort of shaped the early Mets. So Casey Stengel has this 17-year-old high school graduate show up at on his baseball team in July. And he promptly puts him on the bench and tells him to watch. Ed talks about his experience out in California with the Dodgers and how starstruck he was with all the players and with the stadium itself. His first experience, he was sitting on the bench watching Sandy Koufax pitch a no-hitter. He had some hopes of getting into the game and playing, but Casey really just wanted him to watch, and that's really what he ended up doing that day. So I spent a few days with the Mets, and then they put him on a plane and flew him out to join some of their minor league affiliates. And for Ed, who had never flown prior to his first trip to California, now he was on a plane flying all over the place, playing for various minor league teams. He didn't get called back up again to join the Mets until late in the season, and got into his first official game as a late-inning defensive replacement for Gil Hodges on the 22nd of September. He got his first hit, which was a double, on the 28th of September against Don Drysdale. So overall, for the 1962 season, it's sort of infamous. The Mets won 140 games and lost 120, and Ed played a total of 3 games. So it wasn't part of the original roster, but he was one of the 1962 Mets, which gave him a lot of notoriety later on in his career. And that's what a lot of the fans remember about Ed. So 1963 rolls around. The New York Mets. So Ed really wants to play. That's why he joined baseball, and that's his intentions. He's a first baseman during that particular 1963 season, and here's his rookie card. He shares with a few other players, some of some notoriety. And his roommate is Frank Thomas, who's 18 years older than him, and a former player of note for the Pirates. And Frank helped him out a little bit, but Ed again was only 17 or 18 at this time. So in 1963, he was platooning at first base with marvelous Marv Throneberry, who had his own particular demons that particular year and didn't play much ball after batting somewhere in the 140s. He also swapped duties with Hall of Famer Duke Snider in right field. So the 1963 Mets were a little bit better than 62 Mets. Won 51 games and lost 111. Ed played in a total of 86 games that season, batted .209. 1964 rolls around. There's Ed Kranepool's first official card with him as the only player on the card. It's Shea Stadium. It's just opened up. Polo Grounds are no longer where the Mets are playing. And there's a great card of Ed with Casey Stengel, a multiplayer card from the 64 top set. So it's not a phenomenal year for either the Mets or for Ed Kranepool. The Mets ended up with a 53-109 record, still in last place. Ed played in 119 games and was batting .257 by the end of the season. He'd done better, and he was showing some promise still, but he still wasn't quite the successful phenom that everybody had anticipated he would be. So 1965. The New York Mets still in the cellar. There's quite a bit of mobility going on, and players are sort of coming and going. Ed's still on the team, and he talks about the early years being quite a bit of transition and a lot of trades happening and people coming and going. Something significant did happen on that season, though. The Mets picked up Warren Spahn. Now, Warren Spahn happened to wear number 21, which had been Ed's number. So Ed, being the kind-hearted and young individual that he was, gave his number up and picked up number 7, which, as a former Mickey Mantle fan, it was an easy number for him to wear, but he denies that was the reason. He said that happened to be the only infield number available to him at the time. So 1965 was a great season for Ed Kranepool. He was an all-star. He came out beginning of the year batting .287 up to the all-star break and ended up playing on the team. And here's a few other cards of him. This is an embossed card from 1965. A very lifelike image of Ed Kranepool. And here is a transfer, which is a mirror imaged card that you would transfer to things to put his image on. So Ed got selected for the All-Star team, and here's a fantastic picture, one of my favorite cards of Casey Stengel from the 65 season. He didn't actually play in the game. Gene Mauch never played him, and he said he always had a little bit of a beef with him for that. Whenever he would play him or play against the team that he was managing, he would try extra hard to do well, but he never actually got a chance to play. And he said it was kind of a waste for him to spend 3 days, during their so-called time off, going and sitting on the bench. So late in the season, Casey Stengel tripped or slipped and fell and hurt himself. This was in July of 65. And he was replaced by Wes Westrom. And here's a 66 card of Wes Westrum, which was a different kind of a manager. Casey had been trying hard to give Ed opportunities, and he said it said that Casey always defended his players and was known for trying to push them. But he was also sort of a salesperson for the team. Westrum was a much different kind of a manager. So overall, in the 1965 season, the Mets won 50 games and lost 112, but Ed got to play in 153 games, so almost a full-time season for him. 1966 rolls around, and for the first time, and here's a 66 team card showing the 65 stats. For the first time, the New York Mets were not in last place by the end of the season. And a 66 Ed Kranepool card. I think it's a fantastic looking card. Shows him in his batting stance there. Mets won 66 games and for the first time lost less than 100. They lost 95 and it ended up in 9th place. From 1966, here's a rub-off card. A rub-off sticker. You know, Ed talks about these seasons as being those of times of transition, a lot of players coming and going. The Mets still sort of, you know, the fans, he said, were fantastic, even though the Mets themselves were not so. But he said he kept struggling for opportunities to play, platooning back and forth from first base and right field with various players during this time. You know, he mentioned Tim Harkness ended up playing first base in the early 60s, and that kind of limited his playing time. He talked about how he, you know, was back and forth in the minors, especially in 1963. He had times when he battled, when his batting average got down below 200, and basically that was the magic line where you know, you wouldn't be playing ball if you were down below 200. So 1967. Let me showcase a few cards from this set. There's the Mets team card in bright yellow colors. So there's the Ed Kranepool card. 1967 was the year that the Mets began to form what would later become known as the Miracle Mets of '69. Here's another multiplayer card, the second one from the 60s. And both cards from the 60s feature Ed Kranepool as one of the two players. And here's a Venezuelan card of Ed Kranepool. And card collectors know the scarcity of these cards. This is apparently a pretty decent version of it, although I have no idea if it's trimmed. It looks like it might be. There's some tape across the top, but it's a pretty nice copy. So, Wes Westrum's still the manager. The Mets are picking up players, including some pitching that they sorely need. I'll talk a little more about that in my 60 when I show some 68 cards. But I thought it was interesting. Late in the season, Wes Westrum was the manager. But for the last 11 games, Salty Parker, and there is no 1967 card of Salty, but here he is in 1960 as a coach. With Wes Westrum actually the top picture and him to the lower left. Salty ended up managing the last 11 games of the season, so even though the Mets were starting to form what would later become a World Championship winning team, they weren't quite there yet. They won 61 games, lost 104. Ed got quite a bit of playing time. He played in 141 games, but mostly the discussion or the history at this time was the pickups that the Mets had accomplished. All of a sudden, they had some things had changed. It's 1968. And the Mets card. And here is the Ed Kranepool card. It's a nice looking image of him. Just follow through. So the biggest change for 68 was the pickup or the announcement of the new manager, Gil Hodges. Completely changed the nature of the way Mets were playing ball and the strategies behind what they had. Certainly, Gil's influence was something that Ed talked about a lot in his book, and how his strict disciplinarian and adherence to trying to win games, kind of changed the mentality of the team. It just so happened that they had some new talent coming in as well, including Mr. Tom Seaver. So it was still a rebuilding year. The Mets ended the season with 73 wins and 89 losses. It got into 127 games, platooning again, first base. So 1969. There are many videos talking about the Miracle Mets. I'm just going to showcase a few of my favorite cards from the top set. But obviously, the story of the Mets from that season is legendary. This is a nice looking card of Ed Kranepool. There's the Tom Seaver card. Familiar looking image, but a nice clean color card. A nice image. There's the Nolan Ryan, another pitching ace much later than the Mets. At this time, his potential was known, and Ed talked about him as being fast, quick. He could throw hard, but he still lacked control. Another key component of their team was Gary Gentry, shown on that rookie card. And of course, Jerry Koosman. So in 1969, the Mets won 100 games, lost 62. Ed Kranepool played 112 games, but he was also known for having hit a home run in Game 3 of the World Series.
Home run that puts the Mets out in front 5-0.
1970. The Mets coming off winning the World Series. Ed Kranepool celebrates by going into a bit of a batting slump. Here's the 1970 Mets whoop it up, and there's an image of Ed there on the left-hand side of the card, celebrating with his teammates. Here's a 1970 autographed card. Ed Kranepool was certainly prolific at signing autographs. And here's a Kellogg's card from the same year. That must be card number 1 in the set. So 1970, the Mets don't repeat their winning season from 1969. They win 83 games and lose 79. Ed only plays in 43 games that season, ends up batting about 170, and only got up to 52 plate appearances. He ends up spending quite a bit of time in Tidewater in the minor leagues, and the Mets failed to recapture the magic from the prior season. So 1971, the Mets are still trying to come back from and recapture some of the magic. Some of the original team is still there from 69, but slowly they're being traded away. Here's the 71 Ed Kranepool card. So 1971, Ed starts off slow. Slowly starts to make a comeback. In fact, his batting average increased so much that Gillette, the shaving company, offers him a commercial spot where he claims that his change and his success is based on his shaving ritual. So Gillette captures that and uses that in a commercial. I tried to find copies of it to show the commercial. I remember it as a young man watching it, but I can't seem to find copies of it anywhere. But Ed basically, claims that because of the success of his shaving on his batting average, he shaves now between every inning. So 1971 is also the year that Ed Kranepool knocks out Tim Foley. Now, Tim Foley was a bit of a firebrand on the team, and in one particular game, according to the New York Times news article, Tim had been throwing the ball back and forth back to Ed after Ed was practicing on the infield, doing the ground ball rolls to the various position players, and Tim was throwing it all over the place, in the stands, Finally, I guess one ball bounced and hit Ed in the chest, which Ed didn't take very kindly. So later on in the dugout, Tim starts, or Ed actually stopped throwing the ball back to him because of the whole situation. So Tim started to get angry and came up to him and says he has to throw him the ball on the infield, which he then poked Ed Kranepool, 6'5", Bronx-born Ed Kranepool, who then, with one punch, knocked him to the ground. So anyway, Gil Hodges intervened, and the players intervened, and Ed Kranepool went on to hit a home run that game, but no other fallout other than Gil ended up taking Ed's side on this, and the story goes that Ed explains it that Gil had said, if you were doing what you were doing to me, I wouldn't have thrown you the ball either. So Gil Hodges and Ed Kranepool had some falling out prior to this, and this sort of rebuilt that relationship quite a bit. There's also a 1971 Dell stamp. These are hand cut, I believe, but they're interesting looking cards from 1971. 1972, the Mets card. This is one of those other iconic sets from the 70s. Everybody who collects cards typically knows about this set. 1972. Here's the Ed Kranepool card. That's a fairly large set, 780 cards or so. So they also have in action. Here's Ed in action. Looks like he's trying to take a throw from the pitcher, perhaps. Nice looking cards. So unfortunately, in 72, Gil Hodges passes away. He suffers a heart attack and dies. Yogi Berra takes over as the manager of the Mets. But Ed's starting to see a lot of his 1969 teammates being traded away. Obviously, at this point in his career, Nolan Ryan hadn't quite gotten the notoriety or fame that he had, later in his life. But here's an example of, one of the 69 Mets no longer on the 69. Overall, for the season, the Mets didn't fare well. They were over 500. They won 83 games and lost 73. Ed got into 122 games. By 1973, the New York Mets were sort of in it again. They're always trying to find opportunities to change the team around a little bit. Here's the 73 Kranepool card from Topps. Famous batting pose of his. Seems to be in a lot of his cards. Mets pick up a New York icon. Most Mets fans, familiar with this card and with this player. It came obviously Willie Mays coming back to New York and brought some excitement to the team, and also helped them get into the World Series. Here's the Yogi Berra card. Yogi, obviously the manager of the Mets at the time. So the Mets went to the World Series and lost. And Ed talks about this in his book, and he says what he thinks was a key factor was Yogi's decision to pitch Tom Seaver on only 3 days rest in Game 6. And had he rested him and you could have used him in Game 7, he would have been much more effective. But that is what Ed Kranepool claims to be the cause of the Mets' loss of the 1973 series. Now, overall, the Mets were 82 and 79 for the series, for the season, and Ed got into exactly 100 games. So, Ed's always struggling throughout these times to get playing time, but he's still well over 110, 120 game range pretty much season after season. 1974 rolls around. There's the Mets card. And here's the Ed Kranepool card. So, 1974, Ed kind of relegated to pinch hitting. Most reasons, and Ed kind of says he believes it was because of the acquisition of John Milner, who kind of became the full-time Mets first baseman for the season. But even playing as a pinch hitter, Ed still got into 94 games for the season. The Mets were beginning their slow decline into mediocrity by this point. They had won 71 games and lost 91 in 1974. In the mid-1970s Mets, and this was the first year that I began collecting baseball cards. The first packs I opened in 1975. Here's the Mets team card and the Ed Kranepool card. Overall, the Mets for the season were 82 and 80, right around 500 ball, third place. Ed's still getting limited play time, but he did get into 106 games for the season. Here's the mini version of the Topps card. And here's an SSPC image. I believe these cards, most of the images were taken by fans. No professional photographer involved, but this is a pretty good picture of him. It's a little different. It doesn't actually show him batting. It just sort of shows him at rest there, the bat on his shoulder. And for Ed, that's not as common of an image. 1976. Joe Frazier is now the manager of the Mets. They are playing again, about 500 ball, third place, 86 wins and 76 losses. Ed Kranepool gets into 123 games for the season. Here's another him just swinging the bat there. It looks pretty casual. Might even be a spring training image. It's hard to say. But the Mets also pick up home run hitting first baseman Dave Kingman, who makes, obviously a lot of excitement in his bat. Those long home runs he would hit. But overall, he ends up platooning with Dave Kingman, John Milner for first base, and pinch hitting, when it makes sense. 1977. And Joe Torre eventually takes over as the manager for the Mets. As a player initially, but later as a manager. And that happens more towards the 78 season. Here's the team card. Here's a cool picture of Ed Kranepool. You can see he doesn't look very happy. That image. Struggling to get some playing time. But he did get into 108 games for the season. Here's the Joe Torre. Obviously a first baseman as well. And I'd like to throw this card into as well to show this is the last Mets card of Mr. Tom Terrific. And we'll talk about him momentarily. Another great 77 Mets card. There's the Dave King with the All-Star banner across the bottom. Undoubtedly, he's just hit the ball about 500 feet. So the Mets were pretty mediocre at this point. 64 wins, 98 losses, 6th place. But as a lot of Mets fans know, the big deal was in June, so-called Mets Massacre or Midnight Massacre, where the Mets traded away some of their key players for pretty much, some prospects. But most significant in the loss was the loss of Tom Seaver, but also Dave Kingman left as well in June. So by 1978, the Mets had looked a lot different. Ed Kranepool had seen pretty much everybody he'd ever, known from either 69 or 73 was pretty much gone. Here's the team card. And the 78 set is one of those ones that I like. I collected quite a few back in the day. Thought the colors were pretty cool. Here's the Ed Kranepool card from 78. And here is the O-Pee-Chee version of the same card. Looks very similar, but you can see the back is a little lighter. When I opened my first pack of baseball cards in 1978 and pulled this card out, it was very difficult to see. Right, here's the Mr. Franchise, Tom Terrific, wearing a Reds uniform. So Ed talked about his relationship with Joe Torre as not being a great one. What happened was Ed had to get some surgery done on his feet, some bunions, and when he was told he had to do that by Joe Torre, Joe promised him that if you get the surgery done, we'll give you playing time. And so Ed, they shook on it, and that meant to Ed that he was going to get this done. He got it done and promised the play time. So he got the surgery done. But the Mets picked up Willie Martinez. This is a O-Pee-Chee card, I believe. This is Topps major card. Is still with him with the Atlanta Braves. You can see he still got the uniform in the image. But because of that, Ed became relegated as a pinch hitter. From 1978 he only got to pitch or to play in 66 games total. And things were changing at for the Mets as well by this point. Ed had been on the team for over 15 years. Lee Mazzilli was kind of the face of the new Mets, and Ed was the face of the legacy, right? And at this point, the fans knew him. He was the last or one of the last from the 62 team to still be playing ball, but certainly still playing on the Mets. But Lee Mazzilli was coming in, as a young outfielder, and the Mets, were trying to build excitement around the newer, younger players. Ed's still now in his 30s. So in 1978, Ed played in 66 games, but the Mets were pretty mediocre. 66 wins and 96 losses for the season. Again, Ed is the image of the past glory. So we're going to get into the last season for Mr. Ed Kranepool. 1979. The infamous brown-colored cards, which don't seem to color match anything on the Mets, but it is what it is. So Ed Kranepool is pretty much a pinch hitter. He plays in 82 games. The Mets are 63 and 99 on the season. So here's Ed's last baseball card from Topps, at least affiliated with so-called playing days, although by 1980 he was no longer playing. His back shows 18 years with the same team, and his cumulative record. So the Mets and Ed had a bit of a rocky relationship. Ed kept getting fears of being traded. The Mets kept, negotiating with him hardball on his salary. And after Ed left the Mets in 1979, they sort of severed ways. But by 1990, he had reestablished relationships with him. Here's a poor card of Ed from 1989. This is batting pose again. They inducted him into the Mets Hall of Fame in 1990. 1999, he again got some television time in an episode of Everyone Loves Raymond. But by 2019, after that, Ed was sort of a New York icon. Everybody knew who he was. He was one of the last 69 Mets to still be playing, the last of the Mets who were on the 62 team to still be playing, and he had 18 seasons with them. And New York fans, especially Met fans, remember things like that. 2019, he started to have health issues. Shortly after he stopped playing ball in the late 70s, Ed developed type 2 diabetes, which, in his book he talks about a little bit and claims it's probably hereditary. But by 2019, his health issues have gotten worse and worse and worse. By 2019, he needed a new kidney, and this is one of those stories that sort of reads like a baseball trade. A police officer from New York had offered Ed, and this is what Ed describes in his book, had offered Ed his kidney, and I guess he was a fan. If you think you're a fan and you're willing to give somebody your kidney, then you're a super fan. But there was also a fireman in New York that needed a kidney. So the way this worked out is that the police officer donated his kidney to the fireman, and the fireman's wife, who was not a match for her husband, the fireman, donated her kidney to Ed. So it was like a double steal, sort of. And so in 2019, Ed got a new kidney from the wife of a fireman who got the kidney from the police officer who wanted to donate to Ed. So Ed continued to tour, and I saw him show up at Shea Stadium, Citi Field in 2023, I believe it was, or maybe it was 2022, for an old timers game. And it was kind of neat to see him. Obviously he had health issues, he didn't get around, but he talked about his time at the Mets and playing with the different players. Ed passed away on 8 September at the age of 79 in 2024. Still to this day, Ed holds some pretty distinct, records, some for the Mets. So he's number one for the Mets in all-time games played at 1,853 games he's played. He's number 2 at plate appearances, number 3 at bats for the Mets, number 9 in runs, number 3 in hits, number 4 in doubles, number 11 in triples, number 13 in home runs, which is pretty amazing. Number 5 in RBIs, number 9 in walks, and number 3 in total bases. He also holds the distinction of being the pinch hitter with the highest batting average in a single season with more than 30 at bats. So in 1974, as a pinch hitter, Ed batted .486. And his ability to get the ball to drop in for a single and to make contact, kept him in the game, well into his, late 20s, 30s, early 30s, and kept him playing for the Mets. His ability to survive the trades that were happening and the breakup of the team all those years, his relationship with managers. It's an interesting story, and I appreciate your time. I know this has been a bit of a long video, and I've rolled through a lot of cards, but just wanted to do this one. As a Mets fan, knowing that Ed was sort of the face of the past glory for the team when I started collecting cards in the mid '70s. But the Mets, at the end were able to rebuild a relationship with him.
So I just wanted to add a little epilogue here at the end. It's been a few weeks since I started recording this video, and the Mets just announced recently that they're going to be wearing Ed's number 7 on their sleeves for the 2025 season to honor him.
That's all I got. Thanks for watching.